My son had a baseball card collection that lived in a shoebox under his bed. He'd been building it since he was 6. Every Friday night, if he'd had a good week, we'd drive to the hobby shop on Clemens Street and he'd pick out one pack. Just one. He'd shake it, weigh it in his palm like he could feel what was inside, and then he'd carry it to the car without opening it until we got home, sitting at the kitchen table under the good light. That was our thing. He turned 9 in March. By June, he'd stopped asking to go. I noticed, but I told myself he was just growing out of it. Kids do that. One week it's baseball cards, next week it's something else. I'd been 9 once. I remembered how fast interests shifted. So I didn't push. I filed it away with the other small changes I'd been noticing and telling myself meant nothing. The way he'd started wearing his hoodie at the dinner table, even in the heat. The way he'd get quiet in the car if a certain song came on the radio. The way he flinched once when I put my hand on his shoulder to show him something on my phone. Just growing pains, I told myself. I was wrong about that. His name is Caleb. He was 8 when Coach Rutherford first took over the East Side Falcons, the youth baseball league he'd played in since T-ball. I want you to picture him the way he looked that spring. This skinny kid with grass stains on every pair of pants he owned, a gap where his 2 front teeth used to be, a laugh that started quiet and then just took over his whole face. He loved that team. He loved it the way kids love things before the world teaches them to hold back. Coach Rutherford was 52. Retired from a long career as a high school varsity coach over in Marin County. He had a wall of photos in the dugout. Teams he'd coached, trophies, a framed newspaper article from 2009 with the headline, "Falcons Fly High, Coach Rutherford Takes Team to State." He was the kind of man who had a firm handshake and looked you right in the eye when he talked to you. The kind of man the other parents pointed to and said, "Caleb is lucky to have him." My wife said that. I said it too. I said it in April. I said it in May. I kept saying it all the way through June while my son quietly stopped being the kid I knew. The moment I need to tell you about happened on a Saturday afternoon at the end of July. The Falcons had just won their semifinal game. I'd been in the bleachers with the other parents, clapping and cheering, and I was proud, genuinely proud, watching Caleb run the bases. For about 40 minutes I forgot about the hoodie at the dinner table, and the flinching and the Friday nights we didn't go to the hobby shop anymore. He looked like himself out there. He looked like my kid. We were in the parking lot afterward. The other families were still milling around, some of the dads cracking open sodas from the coolers in their trucks, the kids still buzzing. I unlocked the car and Caleb climbed into the back seat. I was about to get in myself when one of the other fathers, a guy named Phil, whose son played second base, caught me and wanted to talk about the playoff schedule. I stood there with my door open, half in and half out of the conversation, and I glanced back at Caleb through the window. He was sitting very still, not the stillness of a tired kid leaning against a car door. A different kind of still, the kind that has weight to it. I wrapped up the conversation faster than Phil probably wanted, got in, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see Caleb looking out the window at the field. Coach Rutherford was still over there talking to a couple of the parents. "Good game today, bud," I said. Nothing. "Caleb." He looked at me in the mirror. His eyes were, I don't know how to say this exactly, they were somewhere else. Like he was looking at me from a long distance away. "Can we just go?" he said. "Please." I pulled out of the lot. We drove for maybe 5 minutes without either of us saying anything. I turned onto the freeway and then I turned it back off and pulled into the parking lot of a Walgreens because I couldn't keep driving. I put the car in park and I turned around in my seat. "Talk to me," I said. He shook his head. "Caleb, whatever it is, you can tell me." He was staring at his cleats. He had his arms crossed over his stomach in a way that looked like it was holding something in rather than keeping something out. He said if I told anyone the team would lose everything, he said, very quietly. He said it would be my fault. The air in the car changed. I kept my voice steady. "I don't know how." "Who said that to you?" He already knew I knew the answer. "Coach," he said. "Caleb." I kept my voice even, kept my hand still on the steering wheel because I needed to be steady for him. "I need you to tell me what happened. All of it. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. And then my 9-year-old son in a Walgreens parking lot on a Saturday afternoon in July told me. It had been going on since May. Private sessions, coach called them. Extra batting practice, one-on-one, an honor, he told Caleb. Not every kid gets this. Caleb had been so proud. He'd come home and told me about them, and I clapped him on the shoulder and said that was great, that was really something. Coach must see something special in you. I had handed my son over and called it a compliment. What Coach Rutherford did during those private sessions, I'm not going to walk through every detail. I won't. What I will tell you is that it was physical, it was deliberate, and it left marks. Not always visible marks, but the kind that stay. I reached back and I took my son's hand. I held it. You did nothing wrong, I told him. Not one single thing. Do you hear me? He started crying then, and I led him and I sat there holding his hand until he was done. Then I buckled his seatbelt, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove straight to UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital. I called my wife from the waiting room. That phone call, I can't fully describe it. There are conversations that change the shape of your life, and that was one of them. I heard her go silent on the other end, and then I heard the sound of her setting something down on the counter very carefully, like her hands needed something to do. I'm on my way, she said. She was there within 20 minutes. We sat on either side of Caleb on a vinyl bench in the hallway, and we waited. The pediatric nurse who examined Caleb was a woman named Dr. Okafor. She was quiet and careful, and she spoke directly to Caleb the whole time, not over his head, not around him. She told him he was brave. I believed her. When she came to talk to me and my wife afterward, her face was measured, but her eyes were not. The injuries are consistent with what he described, she said. I'm required to make a report to Child Protective Services. A detective from the SFPD will be assigned to this case. The detective's name was Torres. He arrived that evening, plainclothes, a notepad, a demeanor that was neither warm nor cold. He took our information. He said they would look into it. He said that 3 times over the next 2 weeks, we would look into it. Meanwhile, Caleb didn't sleep. I found him twice in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, sitting at the table in the dark. He'd stopped eating much. He'd started jumping at sounds. My wife took a week off work to be home with him. We found a therapist, a child trauma specialist named Dr. Fenn, over in the Sunset District, and Caleb started seeing her twice a week. Dr. Fenn told us, gently, that Caleb's responses were completely normal given what he had experienced, and that the most important thing we could do was make sure he felt safe, believed, and not alone. We were trying, but we were also falling apart quietly, my wife and I, taking turns being strong and then finding somewhere private to be the other thing. On the 14th day, I called Detective Torres and asked for an update. He said they were still gathering information. I asked if Coach Rutherford was still coaching. A pause. There's an active investigation we can't discuss. Is he still on the field? I said. Another pause. Mr. Dempsey, I understand your frustration. I hung up. That night I did what I should have done 2 weeks earlier. I got on the Eastside Falcons Parent Forum, one of those private Facebook groups with 340 members, and I posted a message. I didn't name Coach Rutherford by name. I said only that there was an active police investigation involving a staff member of the team, that families with sons on the Falcons should be aware, and that I wanted to hear from any parent who had noticed changes in their child's behavior over the past several months. Within 4 hours, my inbox had 11 messages. 3 of them were from mothers whose sons had also been invited to private batting sessions. One of them was from a man named, I'll call him Greg because his son is still a minor and it's not my story to tell, whose son had told him something 8 months earlier. Greg had gone to Coach Rutherford directly. Coach Rutherford had denied everything, said the boy was misremembering a standard training drill, and Greg had, God help him. And I understand it, because I might have done the same. He had believed him. Greg was the first person I called the next morning. We talked for an hour. By the end of the call, we had a list of 7 families. 7. I went back to Detective Torres with the list. He looked at it for a long moment. Mr. Dempsey, he said slowly. 7 families, I said 7 kids, some of them going back almost a year, and he is still on that field. I laid a folder on his desk. It had the names, the dates, summaries of what each parent had told me, voluntary statements, not coerced, each one written by the parent themselves. "I need you to tell me what happens now." Torres called someone. Then he called someone else. By the end of that week, Coach Rutherford had been placed on suspension pending investigation. By the following Monday, the suspension had become an arrest. The charge was felony child abuse. Counts for 3 of the children, with the investigation ongoing for the others. I watched the news report on my phone in the driveway. I sat in the car for a long time after it ended. But the arrest was not the end. I want to be clear about that. What came next was the part nobody tells you about. The part where you find out that the people who were supposed to catch this didn't, and you have to decide what to do with that. The Pacific Youth Baseball League, the regional governing body that oversaw the Eastside Falcons and 9 other local leagues, had a background check policy for all coaches. On paper, what we found, once we started asking questions, was that Coach Rutherford's background check had been processed through a third-party company that the league had been using since 2014, and that company had a well-documented backlog problem. Rutherford's check had cleared, but it had cleared based on an incomplete National Registry search. There was a complaint from 2016 from a family at his former school in Marin County that had been filed with the school district but never forwarded to the State Athletics Oversight Board. The complaint had been investigated internally. The school district had deemed it unsubstantiated. He had been moved to a different coaching role at the school. Within 18 months, he had retired voluntarily. And then he had walked onto our field. I'm going to say something here, and I need you to hear it plainly. The system did not fail by accident. It failed because people made choices. A school district chose to keep a complaint internal. A league chose a cheaper background check company. A detective chose to believe that 14 days was an acceptable timeline, while a man who had hurt 7 children kept showing up to practices. Every one of those choices has a name on it. Greg and I put together a meeting, not a league meeting, not an official anything. Just a gathering of the 7 families in the back room of a diner in the Excelsior neighborhood on a Tuesday night. I want to tell you what that room felt like. There were 14 adults and a handful of older siblings sitting around pushed-together tables, and not one person was performing anything. Nobody was performing calm. Nobody was performing strength. We were all just there, raw and tired and angry and scared, and that honesty, that willingness to not pretend, was the thing that made it possible to decide what to do next. We decided on 3 things. First, every family would give a formal statement to the DA's office. Not just the 3 families named in the initial charges, all 7. Our attorney, a woman named Vera Hutchins, who specialized in institutional liability, told us that the number of victims and the documented timeline were the 2 most important factors in ensuring that the prosecution didn't offer a plea deal that resulted in no prison time. We were not going to let that happen. Second, we were going to the league's board of directors, not with requests, with demands. A full audit of the background check process for all current coaches and staff. A partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for updated screening protocols. A mandatory training on grooming behaviors for every coach, assistant coach, and team parent volunteer. Mandatory, documented, annual. And a formal reporting structure so that any complaint from a family would go directly to an independent board member, not through the head coach or athletic director. Third, we were going to the city. San Francisco has a Department of Children, Youth, and their families. I had never had reason to know that before July. Now I knew the name of every person on their oversight committee. Greg had a contact through his work who got us a meeting with a city supervisor's office. We brought Vera. We brought the documentation. We brought the names, with permission, of all 7 families. The meeting lasted 2 hours. 4 months later, the city passed an ordinance requiring all youth sports organizations operating on public facilities in San Francisco to meet enhanced background check standards or lose their permits. It wasn't a federal law. It wasn't going to fix everything. But it was a thing that now existed where before there had been nothing, and nothing is what had let this happen. The trial happened the following spring. I'm not going to walk you through the courtroom details. Some things belong to the families who lived through them, and I'm only entitled to my own piece of it. What I'll tell you is that on the last day, when the verdict came in, I was sitting next to Greg, and on my other side was my wife, and her hand was in mine so tight I couldn't feel my fingers. And when the foreman read the verdict, I didn't feel the thing I thought I would feel. I thought I'd feel relief, or triumph, or something clean. What I felt was tired. Deeply, completely tired. The kind of tired that tells you how long you've been holding something up. Guilty, on all counts. 15 years, no possibility of parole for the first 8. We walked out of the courthouse into the gray February light and nobody said anything for a long time. Greg put his arm around my shoulders briefly and then let go. My wife pressed her face into my neck for a moment. Caleb was with Dr. face into my neck for a moment. Caleb was with Dr. Then that afternoon. We'd talked about it, whether to bring him, whether he needed to know the moment it happened. And Dr. Fenn had suggested that we receive the news first and then bring it to him deliberately, carefully, in a context where he felt safe. So when we got home, we sat with him on the couch, the 3 of us, just our family, and I told him. "It's over," he said. "The trial part is over," I said. "Yeah." He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands for a moment. "What about the other kids?" he asked. "Is it over for them too?" I told him yes. I told him all the families had been part of it together. I told him that because of what he had told me in that parking lot, because he had found the courage to say it out loud, things were different now. Not just for our family, but for kids he'd never met. Kids who would play on those fields in the years ahead and be a little bit safer than they would have been. He leaned against me. He was quiet for a while. "I was really scared to tell you," he said. "I know. I thought you'd be mad." "At you? I don't know. Just mad." I put my arm around him and held on. "The only thing I felt when you told me," I said, "was proud. That took more courage than anything I've ever done." He didn't say anything after that. But he didn't move away either. We just sat there, the 3 of us, while the light changed in the room. That was 13 months ago. Caleb is 10 now. He still sees Dr. Fenn once a week instead of twice. He picked up baseball cards again in October. Not the way he used to. Not yet. But he asked if we could go to the hobby shop on Clement Street one Friday, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. He stood at the rack for a long time, touching the edges of the packs, and when he finally picked one, he carried it to the car without opening it. Sat at the kitchen table under the good light. Shook it. Weighed it in his palm. I stood in the doorway and watched him do that, and I had to look away for a second. He's healing. It doesn't look like what I expected healing to look like. It's not a straight line. It's not a return to exactly who he was before. Dr. Fenn told us early on that healing from something like this is less about erasing what happened and more about building a life big enough that the trauma no longer takes up all the space. I hold on to that. Greg's son is also in therapy. The other families are at different places, different paces. We stay in touch. There's a group text, 14 adults, sometimes more, that sometimes goes quiet for weeks, and then someone will send something, a check-in, a small update, a photo of a kid doing normal kid things, and the thread lights up for a while. That connection, those 14 adults who sat in the back of a diner and decided to do something, that's real. Whatever else was taken from us, that part can't be taken back. I want to say one more thing before I finish, and I want to say it directly, because I think it needs to be said plainly. If you are watching this and you have a child in a program, sports, school, church, anything, and something in you has gone quiet and still, the way I went quiet and still, please listen to that. Please don't tell yourself it's nothing. Don't tell yourself kids go through phases. Don't tell yourself the man has a wall of awards and a firm handshake and everybody says he's great. The wall of awards is exactly where people hide. And if your child comes to you in a parking lot, in a Walgreens, in the car, in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, whatever they say, however they say it, the first and most important thing you can do is make them feel that they did the right thing by saying it. Not that you're going to fix it, not that you're going to be angry, not that everything's fine, just, I hear you. I believe you. You are safe. That's the moment. Everything else comes after. But that moment, that is the only one you can't get back. Caleb gave it to me in a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon in July, and I have never been more grateful for anything in my life. He trusted me enough to tell me. I will never stop being the father who deserved that trust. I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the arrest, not the ordinance, not the verdict. I mean, what made the first domino fall? And every time I trace it back, I end up in the same place. A 9-year-old boy deciding that his father was safe enough to tell the truth to. That was not guaranteed. I want to sit with that for a second, because I think it's the part we skip over too fast. Caleb didn't tell me because I'm some exceptional father. He told me because somewhere along the way, in all the ordinary Friday nights and car rides and kitchen table moments, he had collected enough evidence to believe that I wouldn't fall apart when he needed me to hold it together. Children are always watching. They're always running quiet calculations about whether the adults in their lives can handle the weight of real things. Caleb had been running that calculation on me for 9 years, and in a Walgreens parking lot in July, he decided the answer was yes. I think about what would have happened if I had rushed him, if I had shown my rage before I showed him my steadiness, if I had made that moment about my feelings instead of his safety. I think about that version of events a lot, and it frightens me, because it was entirely possible. The anger was there. It was right there. The only thing that held it back was the understanding, barely conscious in the moment, that what he needed from me right then was not a father who was furious on his behalf, but a father who was present and immovable and safe. That is what I mean when I talk about character being a choice. Not a feeling, a choice. Rutherford had decades of accolades and a wall full of trophies and the trust of an entire community. He also made a choice, every single time, to use that trust as cover rather than as responsibility. That's the part that still keeps me up some nights. Not that monsters are rare, but that they tend to build reputations before they build crimes. The reputation is the tool. The trust is the weapon. This is why the size of someone's title should never be the ceiling of your scrutiny. Greg had to live with having believed Rutherford 8 months earlier when his son tried to tell him. I watched Greg carry that in the diner meeting, in the courthouse hallway, in every group text message for the months that followed. He is not a bad father. He made a very human mistake in a situation designed to produce exactly that mistake. What I hope he hears, and what I hope you hear, is that the moment he chose to pick up the phone and call me, the moment he put his name on that statement for the DA's office, that was the choice that mattered. It is never too late to do the right thing, but it is always more costly the longer you wait. Caleb is 10 now. He is learning, slowly, that what happened to him is not the whole story of who he is. That is not something I can teach him directly. It's something he has to discover by living, by getting back to the hobby shop on Clement Street, by opening a pack of cards under the kitchen light, by letting ordinary good things accumulate until they take up more space than the hard thing. All I can do is make sure the ordinary good things keep showing up. I can drive him there on Fridays. I can sit across the table and watch him weigh the pack in his palm like he's reading something only he can feel. That's the work. Not dramatic. Not a speech. Just showing up steady, so he keeps believing that the truth has somewhere safe to land.